Hello everybody. Today I'm going to teach you how I textured for Arma 3 because I'm seeing a lot of examples from new modders in the community who are having a lot of problems with their textures, small artifacts, things like that, and their lighting just looks a little bit off. I just want to release this so we can continue to see really good quality work from the new people in the community. So I'm going to go through step by step how I would texture an object like this. I'm not going to show you how to actually texture an object. There's hundreds of tutorials on how to use Substance Painter to get professional looking textures, but I'm going to show you how to get the correct lighting and how to add a high poly to this item. So we should have something that looks like this, and when the textures are finished, it should look like this. So this is a model I made earlier. It's an extremely basic model. It's only for example purposes, but I am going to show you now how I would add a high poly. Now a high poly does not affect the performance of your game, so you can add really nice looking 3D looking textures to an object, and it doesn't increase the vertices count, doesn't increase the face count. This is still the object that's going in the game. The high poly is just basically a model that the texture engine projects onto it to add fake 3D geometry. If I was to make a high poly on this straight away, if I was to just start adding chunks onto it, it would look like this. As you can see, we have some artifacting problems where the bake is overlapping with each other, and also the fake 3D geometry just obviously does not look correct. It isn't angled correctly. So this is how I personally fixed that issue. I don't know if this is the professional way. I know there are things like cages you can use to get the correct lighting, but I don't use that. This is how I use it. So first of all, we have this. This would be my finalized. It's fully UV mapped. It's ready to go in game. I would call this file Blender 1, and then once that's done, I would file save as. As you can see here, I've already done some tests. I save this as low poly main, and now this would be my low poly. So I go up here, I type 1 underscore LP, which is object 1 low poly. Now if you have a few objects with multiple materials, each material I would change the name to like 2 underscore low poly. And then I do something which I call exploding the model, which is I grab it, I select all, I press P, and I separate by loose parts. Now, when I bake the object, each separate object is only going to bake onto itself. It's not going to bake onto other objects. It's not going to overlap the baking. Now, if we were to slap a high poly on this, we would still have the problem where the lighting directions would just not look right for the fake 3D geometry. So what we would also do is any object that we're going to be putting a high poly on, we grab it, or we could just grab all of it if we wanted to. We press tab, we select all, and we subdivide. We can subdivide it a few times, it doesn't really matter how many times. And this just creates more areas, more faces for the engine to just correctly add the fake 3D geometry on. And this will not, again, even though this is the low poly and we're exporting this low poly for Substance Painter, we're not actually exporting this low poly model into the game. We're exporting the one that we saved earlier. So this will not affect the UV map in too many ways. So once we have this low poly ready, we go to obviously export it as what you want. I'm just going to export it as FBX. I'm going to put low poly main, export, and now we are ready to add a high poly on. So let's save this now as high poly main, and let's just do some example work. So if I grab like the face, and if I want to just add some eyes and face to it like a snowman or something, just press F. Now I've created like a weird snowman thing. Now if I wanted to add some like bolts here, which are normally quite high poly, so you don't really want them on your main object, what I can do is I can just grab some bolts. I've got some earlier that I bought in a pack. And if I just increase the size of this model, oops, I can grab this and I can just place this wherever I want onto the model itself. Create a few more for examples. And then what you do, you select all of these and make sure they are on, so they're attached to the object that they're going to be baking onto. So make sure to select these first, don't select this first, select the bolts first, select the object you're going to be baking onto last, and just Control J to join them onto the object. Make sure that that's still named the original name, which is 1_LP. And now when we bake the high poly onto the low poly, these will bake only onto this object. One thing we can also do to um, make sure that these look a bit more realistic, let's say we're baking a purple square and we want these bolts specifically to be colored differently to the purple. You could manually draw over the bolts, but an easier way is if you just select the object that you're going to be having as a high poly, you go to vertex color mode, you pick a color, let's say green, press the paint by face and press Shift K. That will turn them green, and now when you go into Substance Painter, as I'll show you later, you can specifically just select the color green when it asks for a color selector, and it will only paint the bolts the color that you want rather than the rest of the object. So now we have this high poly object we're going to bake onto our low poly object, and this is an extremely basic high poly. You could make these objects look really detailed, add sculpting onto it, add damage onto it, make these objects smoother. Anything you want to make your high poly look nice. Now we file, export, and again you can name and set it whatever you want, but I'm just going to call it high poly main. And now that's ready, the high poly is ready, we're going to move over to Substance Painter. Okay, so I've got the object here that I exported, the low poly underscore main, and we're going to bake a high poly onto it. So we go over to our texture set settings, we go over here to bake mesh maps. We make sure our output size is the same as our file size, as the original file size that we imported, which is 248 by 248. You can apply diffusion if you want. You come over here and select your high poly main. And now we want your anti-aliasing to be 4 times or 2 times. You can have it as 8 times, but it takes a lot longer. Make sure you match by mesh name. Make sure you have underscore low poly, underscore low poly, because both objects were named underscore low poly. You can go through and individually rename everything on the high poly to underscore high poly, but I just leave it the same as low poly. It doesn't really matter for my smaller objects that I make. Then you click Bake Selected Textures. Now you'll see here that the textures themselves won't come out perfect. So you can see that this looks a bit off, and these have some weird black things, and that's because the lighting, the way the lighting's hitting is not from far away enough, and it's not allowing enough depth onto the item. So we go back here and we click on Bake Mesh Map. You see this max frontal distance and max rear distance. If you have objects that really stick far out, you want to increase that just slightly. You also want to increase the rear distance. You can increase the rear distance to whatever you want, but I find there's more problems the higher this is. So I like to just keep it to about 0.1, 0.2 max. But this, you can have this at whatever you want. When that's finished baking, you should see now, once it loads, the objects look a lot nicer. The lighting is correct here, the lighting is correct here, it looks really nice and clean. However, one thing that we did forget to do, and this is something that I've had a lot of problems with in the past, and it's a very simple fix, is trying to figure out how to actually add the color selection. Now we added a vertex color to these balls. So again, we come back to Bake Mesh Maps. We can deselect all of these and just leave ID selected. Here we can just click on vertex color, and sometimes if you have multiple materials, you can click on apply all right here. However, there's only one material, so it doesn't matter. And again, now we just click on Bake Select Texture, and you'll see here now If we go to color ID, you see that where the bolts are perfectly selected green. This is a special, lighting engine that a lot of games use to make objects look really pretty. You've got the shine from the environment. You've got really nice normal maps because of the lighting hitting it. But Arma 3 does not have an advanced lighting engine. The game is almost 10 years old now. So what we have to do is we have to go to base color. And this is most likely what the object in game is going to look like. Right now, there's no textures on this object, so it's just going to look blank. But when we do add textures, I'll show you what the object in game is going to look like. So straight away, if we add something like a steel pit, as you can see, doesn't really look that nice. It's really bright, and in material mode, looks fine, looks lovely, but in game, it's going to look awful. So to get around that, let's go to our filters. Here we are. Grab baked lighting environment, slap that on the top. In here we go to our environmental maps. Now this is a map that I've got from Arma 3 itself. This is the environmental map that Arma 3 uses. We grab that, slap that into the environmental map area here. And you can play around with these if you want. I'm happy to leave them as they are. And as you can see, this looks a lot nicer compared to what it did. It adds shadows to it. It adds depth to it. It looks really nice. And it also really brings that high poly out that we made. And this is how I specifically texture a lot of my objects for Arma 3. I make sure that the lighting environment, baked lighting environment, is at the top to give it that nice high poly quality look. Now, as I said, I'm not going to teach you how to texture this an object. There's hundreds of tutorials online on how to make really nice textures. However, finally, before I leave, I am just going to show you how to color in these bolts. Let's say you don't want them to be red. You can just come over here, and let's say you want them to just be in an aluminium color. You click on black mask. You click on add color selector. Here we go, and pick your color, which is green, and you can make them a bit softer, increase the tolerance. And there you go. They've already been selected, and now they're white compared to the red that they were before. So I hope this helps when it comes to you creating your textures. I'm going to include the environmental map PNG in a link in this video. But I really, look forward to seeing how you use this tutorial to enhance objects that you've already made. Thank you.